Thanks so much. Thanks, everybody. Great to be here with you. And thanks so much to those online as well. I just want to double check that the folks online can hear us okay. If people want to give us a thumbs up or something so that we know people can hear us online. Yeah, perfect. Okay, that's great. Thanks, Amy. Thanks, John. So really pleased to be with you here today. As I mentioned, I'm based in Ottawa, but come down to Toronto at least a few times a year, and timing worked out really well that we could be here today and join you all at Civic Tech. I was one of the co-founders of Ottawa Civic Tech, which has been on a little bit of a lull lately. Although exciting news, a few of us are getting together next week to talk about resurrecting it. So hopefully we'll have some good news for the Civic Tech scene in Ottawa in the coming weeks. But always really excited to come down to these groups. I know it's a very passionate group of people who care about, government and society in general, and in particular that intersection with technology, which is what we're all about. So Megan and I want to spend some time today sharing with you some work that we've been doing over the last year and a half or so about digital maturity. So we're going to share a little bit with you just about, I think grounding on what digital maturity means in the context of government, why it matters, and then Megan's going to walk you through our digital maturity assessment model that we've built. And talk to you about one of our pilot projects we had a chance to run in the GTA last year, and then hopefully have a little bit of time for Q&A and discussion. And we're going to be hosting a breakout group after the presentation. So for those who want to dive in a little bit further and ask more questions, happy to kind of hold court with you here afterwards. So just to start with, in terms of, why this is important. This quote you see up on the screen is from Scott Bryson, former Treasury Board Minister federally, was Canada's first Minister of Digital Government back when they had that portfolio. And he was fond of this notion that in the 21st century, you're either digital or you're dead. He would often say, you can't be a you can't be a blockbuster government in a Netflix world. And while I think that is true, I think in the public sector, we have this unique challenge that is there is this third option of becoming a digital zombie. Because government is the traditional organization that is too big to fail, can kind of keep moving on, not modernize as much as it should, and not really be able to take advantage of the opportunities of the digital era, but kind of keep slowly moving forward. And this is a thing in our work that we find that we're really concerned about is how do we stop these public sector organizations from that digital zombification, if I can put it that way. Put another way, Jennifer Polka, who many folks will know, one of the co-founders of Code for America, was often fond of talking about this quote, about this notion that, policy and process simplification is necessary for technology modernization to mean anything. And I think, often when people talk about digital and government, they get kind of caught up with the shiny object syndrome. And actually, there's a much deeper transformation that has to be able to happen as part of it. So for us, when we're talking about digital, we're really talking about this kind of more holistic look at the culture, practices, processes, and technology. This is borrowed from a definition from Tom Loosemore, who was one of the co-founders of the Government Digital Service in the UK. And this notion that if public sector organizations are going to be successful, they have to be able to adapt not just the tools, but the ways of working. And so when we walk you through our digital maturity model, one of the things you'll see is there's a little bit of it about technology, but actually a lot of it is about mindsets, and it's about ways of working, and it's about culture. So it's it's not kind of a traditional, that you might see from a management consultancy that's very much about, do you have cloud servers and do you have the latest AI implementation? It's actually much more about the way people work and those types of practices within the organization. So this is our digital maturity model at a very high level, as we call the hexagon for obvious reasons. Megan's going to walk you through it in some depth in a moment, but it essentially combines two things: the 10 digital standards from the federal government, and then a set of what we call foundation enablers. And in total, it gives us a set of these kind of 6 top-level categories and 18 sub-indicators in total that make up this maturity model. So we're going to walk you through a little bit in a moment of our process of developing this, why we picked these ones, and what kind of the results coming out of this can look like. And, in the context of Civic Tech and the folks who are here with us in person and online today, I think this matters because inherently, anything in the civic tech realm ultimately at some point has to interact with government at some level in some way, right? It's really, civic tech is about strengthening society, strengthening the public sector in a variety of different types of ways. And, we find in our work, even though Think Digital is a private company, our mission is very much to work on building capacity with government. And often when we're engaging with a client, they don't know what they don't know. And there's that kind of starting process of helping them to understand what some of their blind spots might be, which I think is in many cases the beginning to then be able to do something interesting with them. And so for us, that was kind of our motivation behind creating this model, is we wanted to have a tool to be able to use with organizations to help them think about their digital maturity in a different way. And I think with Civic Tech, this can potentially be an interesting bridge to the type of work you want to do with organizations to actually understand where those organizations might need help and might need some support. And so, so lastly, before I hand it off to Megan, this all started fortuitously with us thinking about, how do we develop a model like this, and us having a real world client who was interested in this as well. And that was York Region here in the GTA. And York has been going through an interesting digital transformation for a number of years. They've had a digital strategic plan in place, but they really wanted to understand how mature they were as an organization. And so we ended up creating a partnership with them to co-develop this digital maturity model as a way for them to be able to measure how they were doing on their digital journey. But importantly for us to actually, practice user research and have a real live client for us to develop this model with and be able to learn with and grow with. And so, our goal from this really was to help them be able to have a mirror that they could hold up to understand how they were doing as an organization, and also for them to be able to think about how do they prioritize the types of things they want to do going forward. So that was the baseline for it, and we had the great opportunity to run this pilot with them last year, officially concluded that first run of this maturity model in December. And so now we're at a stage where we're hoping to be able to share this out with other organizations. So that's part of why we're here today, and I'm going to turn the floor over to Megan, who's going to kind of walk you through the development process we went through of the model, why it's structured the way it is, and what it looks like. So Megan, the floor is over to you.
Sweet. Thank you, Ryan, and hello, everyone. So Ryan mentioned that the Government of Canada digital standards were one of the sort of pieces we used for this. And if you're not familiar with it, it actually is a pretty great starting point, especially if you're working with folks who are maybe still new to digital and kind of this modern way of working. It's nothing groundbreaking for folks who have been in this space for a long time, but I do find that it's really laid out in a really simple and fairly accessible way. And these are guideposts, right? But they're not necessarily enough to help us get that fuller picture of, sort of what is an organization capable of when it comes to digital. And so as good consultants do, we did a ton of research to try and figure out what's missing if we're using those 10 digital standards as a starting point. Again, I'm not going to belabor this point, but basically what we found is that in terms of comparable sort of assessment standards or processes that you can use to look at digital maturity, nothing was really a perfect fit for what York was looking for. We also found some really interesting kind of outliers when we looked especially at other government assessments as well as those from the private sector. And so ultimately, as I mentioned, we found quite a few things were missing that we added in. These are the foundational enablers that Ryan mentioned. And I find this really helpful for folks working in civic tech, because if you're thinking about an organization you might want to work with, say, whether it's in the problem definition stage where you want to find a meaningful, sort of civic challenge, as well as, sort of a sponsor who's interested in that, or, you have a solution that you want to share with government, you want to find someone that ideally is equipped to actually work with you effectively. Sometimes there can be a really big gap between where our public institutions are and where, sort of groups like this are working. And so some of the things we found were around, procurement. This is a popular topic right now, given what's in the news with ArriveCan and things like that. HR and talent recruitment, even just basic stuff like access to tools. There are still parts of government where people cannot access, Google Slides, for example, or Google Forms or stuff like that. So quite a lot that needed to be added to it. And so as Ryan mentioned, that's how we came up with our hexagon model. It's not necessarily fully complete, and we are actively trying to iterate on it. So if you're interested, we'd love to hear your feedback at the breakout group afterwards. We're also running a workshop later this week for folks who want to actually get hands-on with some of the aspects of the model. So if you're interested in that, please let us know. So again, 18 different sort of indicators. These are drawn from 3 different data sources. I'm not going to go into too much detail here either. Happy to walk you through it in more detail afterwards, but these are sort of more descriptions of each of the categories and kind of what we're looking for when we want to sort of assess the maturity level of an organization. You know, how well are they doing things like data stewardship? How well are they actually doing things like organizational structure in terms of how it's built to be able to allow for decision making? So as I mentioned, we had 3 different types of indicators. We wanted to try and make this something that's easy enough to do relatively quickly and affordably, but also robust. And this is a really big challenge, right? Maybe some of you have taken those online quiz type tools, right? Where you're just sort of like answering from a multiple choice question. That's maybe a little bit too lightweight for what we're trying to do. But we also don't want this to take, you know, literally years and millions of dollars, because it's not going to be timely enough. And so we had 3 different types of indicators. One was a documentation review. So really trying to do what I call institutional archaeology, figure out what actual written policies, practices, et cetera, exist inside the organization and how mature are they. We also did a survey of staff. So to try and understand sort of the on the ground feeling within employees. Because if you talk to leadership, you're going to get one story. And then if you talk to folks on the working level, you might get another. And so we really wanted to go broad. Then we also wanted to go deep. So we did a workshop where we actually pulled together folks who represent a wide swath of the organization and tried to get the more sort of nitty gritty detailed pieces. Not everyone might be able to refer to how effective procurement is, but we brought together, for example, the right people who could talk about that. And so ultimately this leads to our 5-stage or 5-step scoring sort of process. And so, you know, at the very beginning, we have sort of first steps indicating sort of a low level of maturity, just starting out. We wanted to be kind of generous and not feel like anyone's failing in any way, but just that, you know, this is the early stage. And that then sort of moves through the 5 steps into leading practice, where you would be, you know, ultimately, I would expect to see very few orgs necessarily scoring those 5s. That's really where others are looking to you as a leader. When we were designing this, we were really assuming that most folks would be sort of in that maybe 2, 3, 4 range, just again, depending on where they are on their journey. And sure enough, when we've tested this, that's kind of been where things have landed for a lot of folks, aside from some certain outliers. And so this is what it kind of looks like in terms of the output. So classic spider chart, right, where you can kind of get a glimpse right across those 6 categories. How are we doing? So this, you know, sort of example has, you know, sort of an area of opportunity around, you know, sort of working in the open, some strengths around sort of the people and governance side, and then some opportunities around, you know, sort of user-centered as well as agile to improve. So trying to be that like diagnostic, quick, you know, sort of, okay, where are we at? How are we doing? And then, of course, to have that more detailed look as well, to say, okay, well, across that category, we're doing okay, but there might be some nuance within it that we want to go into more depth around. And so that's where we have this breakdown to sort of say, okay, you know, for user-centered, you're doing quite well, but, you know, you may want to pay a little bit more attention to designing with users because you scored fairly low relative to the rest of the category. And so again, at a quick glance, trying to give something that's actionable. I really see 2 main sort of use cases for this for me. One is if you're a new leader coming into an organization, or you're, you know, someone wanting to, again, work with that organization, figure this out as your baseline. Where are people at? Where are their strengths that we can maybe leverage, and where there's some areas we need to actually work on? The other option too is if you're sort of midway through a series of initiatives, whether that's working with civic tech groups or investing in a digital strategy, how do you sort of check that things are working? And ideally, you know, you're doing this kind of maybe once every year or something like that to show change over time. This might help avoid some of that digital zombie piece where, you know, it looks like maybe you're continuing to invest, but you're actually gradually sort of falling behind more and more. So this is like a glimpse at like what the scorecard would look like in more detail. Again, showing the different indicators that roll up into that score, so that if you're not sure why you're scoring low on one of these categories, you could actually go in and get more detail about that. So for example, here, there's a score of 0 on the user feedback practices. So clearly folks in the workshop felt that the feedback practices within the organization were not particularly robust. And so as a leader or as someone who wants to help this org, you could sort of say, all right, that's where we need to spend some attention and time. We also included what we call observations. So because this is a mixed method research approach, really interesting data came out of the workshops especially. And so we tried to roll that up so that, again, whoever's looking at this has some additional detail, not just on kind of the what, but also potentially some how on sort of addressing it or fixing it. And so that's my little methodology deep dive. I'm gonna hand it over to Ryan to close us off and shift into Q&A.
Thanks, Megan. And I should just note that the examples Megan was just showing about the results really were just examples. That wasn't York Region's actual results. We wanted to give something just illustrative of kind of what that looks like in terms of the output that comes out of it. So, I think we, in a very kind of quick way, had a chance to kind of walk you through the model, what the outputs look like that. We wanted to make sure we had some time for Q&A, so we'll come to that momentarily, because I really do, if people want to dive into different parts of that, happy to answer some questions, and then we'll do a breakout that we can host here afterwards for those who want to discuss it further. But just to say, again, as Megan mentioned, we really tried to strike this balance between rigor and agility on this. And how do we get something that can be done, within a couple of months without, super complex and super burdensome procurement or spending a ton of money, but still gives organizations something useful as a data point for them to be able to kind of chart that course forward. And really, the metaphor I often use for this work is it's helping an organization hold a mirror up to itself. And so, our hope is by combining those perspectives of looking at their policies, talking to employees, and then getting the management perspective, the triangulation of those three gives you at least a direction in terms of where they're going, directionally gives you a sense of what the strengths are, what the weaknesses are, and then hopefully for the organization becomes something that they can use to be able to chart their course, decide what the priorities are for them, and where they want to put their effort in the coming years. So we were really excited to have this opportunity to do it with a real live client with York Region. We had some great feedback from them. And we're very much right now in kind of the process of trying to get feedback from others on how we can improve this model, how we can evolve it, but also importantly, we'd love to be able to do this with other organizations. And so we're just trying to spread the word a little bit that this is out there as an option. Again, would love to kind of get thoughts from all of you, both kind of immediately in the Q&A and when we go to some discussion afterwards. So I think I'm going to leave it at that for right now, and maybe just kind of move to, I think we've got about 10 minutes or so, kind of open the floor. We're so efficient, Megan. We got through this so quickly. So we've been doing this too many times. We're just kind of chopping through. Well, I think having more time is always better, right? For Q&A. Yeah. So we'd love to just open the floor if folks have questions. Yeah.
And then we'll get to the Q&A.
Maybe I'll just, Olivia, actually, maybe before you do that, before you stop the recording, is it still recording?
Yeah.
Let me do two quick things just for the sake of posterity. First, shameless self-promotion. We run a podcast. I host a podcast called Let's Think Digital, where we talk about all things digital and government, of big interest to, I think, the civic tech community. So if you haven't checked it out, check it out. There's stickers there at the front. Grab some swag on the way out. Tell your friends about it. We've had some interesting episodes and a couple more left in this season coming up in the next few weeks. And then I will just kind of put this up on the screen for a moment. For anybody, particularly for those who are online and not here in the room, if you are interested in learning more about the digital maturity model or want to have a chat with us, feel free to either scan the QR code or go to the Menti, and it's just a one form that'll let you be able to give us your name and email, and we're happy to follow up with you if folks have any further questions about this after today's session, and particularly for those online who can't hang around afterwards. So I will leave it at that, and yeah, we can go to Q&A.
Awesome.